Opposites often attract, but sometimes it seems almost unbelievable. The heroes of this story were so opposite that it ended tragically. Caitlin and David Beckby met when they went to Disneyland with mutual friends in the 1960s. At that time, David worked in the U.S. Army, was an intelligent and charming man, sociable, which attracted Kate from the very beginning. They quickly found a common language and talked throughout the trip. After meeting, they became inseparable, and 5 months later, they tied the knot. The couple settled in San Diego, California, USA. The heroine of the story started working as a nurse, while her husband became a software engineer after leaving the armed forces. The couple really wanted to have children, but for many years they were unsuccessful. They turned to medicine, although back then fertility treatments were much more limited than they are now. But Kate was eventually able to get pregnant. They had already been thinking about adopting a child, so the event became a joyous occasion. The family had a boy named Andrew. Later, the family of three moved to a suburb of San Jose. Their son Andrew was very friendly and sociable, and from an early age, he was involved in the Boy Scouts. For his active participation, he even received rare awards. This speaks to the boy's diligent and hard work. He had a best friend named Kurt, and they had been friends since elementary school. The boys shared an interest in making funny videos. Andrew was always close to his family and prioritized them. After entering college, the young man began dating a girl named Heather. They were in parallel courses. Andrew dreamed of following in his mother's footsteps and entering the medical field. This interest brought him closer to his mother, as they often discussed it. The family was very harmonious and seemed like a role model to follow. After graduation, Andrew applied to several medical universities. Unfortunately, he was not accepted into any of them, which was a huge blow. He was very upset and decided to try again the following year, planning to get a job in the meantime so he wouldn't be a burden on his parents. However, just a few days after the rejections, his mother found an envelope from Memorial University of Newfoundland, located in Canada. The letter stated that the young man had been accepted for enrollment. It had simply gotten lost among other envelopes. This letter turned the young man's life around. In 1995, Andrew found himself in the city of St. John's, Canada, where the university was located. The following year, his fiancée, Heather, also moved there, as she decided to apply to the same institution. However, their relationship started to crack. A few months later, something very traumatic happened to Andrew. His girlfriend ended their engagement without any explanation. During this period, he threw himself into his studies to cope with the pain. This continued until his third year, when, in the spring of 1999, he met a woman named Shirley Turner. This marked his first relationship after the breakup with Heather. The news was initially received very positively, especially by his family and friends, who were afraid Andrew might not want to build a new relationship after his engagement ended. However, the joy was short-lived, specifically until the moment of meeting the new girlfriend. Shirley was significantly older than Andrew. At the time, the young man was 26, while the woman was already 38. This caused some misunderstandings between them. She had graduated from Memorial University and was a teacher. After completing her education, Shirley taught natural sciences for a long time, but in the mid-90s, she decided to return to school and pursue a medical degree. In 1998, she graduated and worked as a resident in various hospitals. By this time, she had developed quite a questionable reputation. Shirley was often accused of improper treatment of patients and visitors, being overly confrontational and causing arguments out of nowhere. One of her supervisors at the hospital even wrote in her work review that every time he interacted with her, he felt like he was being manipulated. She had been caught lying multiple times, which led to various conflicts. From the moment they met, Shirley took control of Andrew. She accompanied him everywhere. His friends described her behavior as quite strange. She was constantly touching Andrew, hugging him, and often inappropriately started talking about their active sex life. This frequently left the young men bewildered. When she found out about Andrew's ex-fiancée, a young and attractive woman named Heather, she became visibly jealous and tense. She began calling the young woman and bragging about how wonderful her relationship with Andrew was. As a result, Shirley developed a reputation as an unstable person, and nobody among Andrew's friends or family liked her. They repeatedly hinted that Andrew could find someone better, given his calm nature and pleasant appearance. However, after the breakup with Heather, Andrew's self esteem was clearly diminished. Andrew sincerely believed that Shirley was the best he could hope for, and he saw no reason to dream of something better. His family could only wait and hope that their relationship would eventually fizzle out. After graduating from university in 2000, Andrew moved to Syracuse, New York, USA, where he planned to work at a medical center. At the same time, Shirley moved to the tiny town of Sac City, Iowa, USA, with a population of about 2,000 people. She signed a 10-year contract to work at the county medical center. Andrew's family was relieved, believing that fate had finally separated them and they would no longer have to deal with Shirley. Despite the distance, it seemed that Shirley was very interested in maintaining a relationship with her boyfriend and didn't let go of him. Andrew worked a lot and rarely found time to visit her, but Shirley regularly came to see him. Between these visits, she constantly called him on his home and mobile phones. One day, she came over and stayed until Andrew had to leave for work. As soon as they said goodbye, Shirley called and said that she had forgotten her purse at his apartment. The guy handed her the keys, and when he returned from his shift, he discovered that much more was missing than what Shirley had mentioned. This seemed suspicious and raised concerns about the woman's integrity. Despite the obvious theft, Andrew still felt he didn't deserve any better and decided to stay in the relationship. Andrew quickly realized that he didn't like his new job and living situation, so about a year later, he moved to the small, cozy town of Latrobe, Pennsylvania, with a population of 8,000. By 2001, he decided to specialize in family medicine, and it seemed like the perfect place for that. The town had a close-knit local community, which had always attracted the protagonist of this story. Andrew envisioned himself as a doctor, a true savior for such a small community. Everyone would know him, love him, and respect him. His dream was beginning to come true in Latrobe. The problem was Shirley. She still wanted to be with him. But by this time, Andrew had had enough of the obsessive relationship and wanted to focus completely on his work, so he insisted on breaking up. It seemed like she didn't understand what was happening, still deluding herself with the hope that she could move in. Andrew started ignoring her. Then Shirley became a real stalker, leaving up to 30 voice messages a day. Despite the fact that the protagonist was determined to end this relationship, in September 2001, Shirley told him she was pregnant and that he was the father of the future child. Overall, the guy was happy to become a father, but didn't want to tie his life to such an obsessive woman. Andrew understood that from that moment on, Shirley would not leave him alone and would interfere in his life, even preventing him from starting new relationships. As soon as he spent a few days talking to a new girl, Shirley immediately found out about it, contacted her, and told her that she was carrying Andrew's child. Naturally, the new relationship didn't work out. Meanwhile, Shirley was actively spreading the news about her pregnancy and the upcoming fatherhood. At first, she wanted to have an abortion. Then she announced that she was planning to keep the baby. The manipulations worked, and a month later, Shirley managed to force her boyfriend to restore their relationship. They even considered getting engaged. At the end of October 2001, there was a meeting with Andrew's friends and family. Everyone could see how possessively she behaved toward him. Just a week later, Shirley admitted that she had actually fabricated the pregnancy to tie Andrew to her. Andrew got angry and declared that he didn't want to continue a relationship with a pathological liar and manipulator and didn't even want to remain friends. He insisted that she stay away from him. On November 3rd, Shirley was forced to return to Iowa by plane. Andrew thought that finally she would leave him alone and that the distance would do its job. But just 2 days later, on the morning of November 5th, 2001, the stalker knocked on his door. He had to go to work. He didn't want to talk to Shirley, but she convinced him that they needed to have a serious conversation, so he allowed her to stay in the apartment. Andrew told her that they could discuss everything at 6 p.m. at a place called Keystone Park. All day, Andrew worked at the hospital and was on edge. His colleagues noticed that he seemed anxious and troubled. When they asked him what was going on, he explained that this psychopath, as he put it, had shown up at his door again. Andrew shared his worries about the morning incident and once again received the advice to cut ties with this woman for good and not let her take over his life. He also mentioned that he planned to meet with Shirley that evening and finally break up with her. Andrew was determined to end the relationship and hoped to be free by 7:30 p.m., and by 9 p.m., he was supposed to meet his best friend Clark at a bar to celebrate his freedom from the obsessive woman. Clark was at the bar at the appointed time, but Andrew never showed up, which was unusual. He had never been late or missed a meeting before. His friend became worried, but was sure that the conversation with Shirley had dragged on, so he figured they wouldn't meet that night and would catch up in the morning at work. However, that didn't happen, and things turned into a real panic when Andrew didn't show up for his shift the next day. He didn't answer any of the calls from Clark, his parents, or colleagues. By 9 a.m., Clark was about to contact the police to check on Andrew's well-being, but he didn't have time. The news came on TV announcing that a man's body had been found in Keystone Park wearing medical scrubs. The body was identified as Andrew Beckby, 28 years old. It was discovered by a homeless man collecting cans at 6 a.m. It lay in the parking lot next to his own Toyota Corolla. Dr. Beckby had been shot 5 times in the back, face, and chest. Apparently, after he had already fallen to the ground, the killer finished him off with a shot to the back of his head. The police were immediately contacted by his coworker, who told them that they wouldn't have to search for the killer for long, as he knew who Andrew had been with last and who he had had a conflict with. Naturally, it was about his relationship with Shirley Turner. He gave a detailed account of the couple's history and the woman's erratic behavior, as well as the fact that Andrew had planned to meet her that evening at the same park to break up, which she hadn't wanted and had fiercely insisted on reviving the relationship. The coincidences were too obvious. The detectives took this information seriously and immediately contacted the suspect, who was already back in her hometown in Canada. She claimed that she had been in Iowa all day because she had fallen ill and then went to visit her parents. Of course, this was a lie, as she had come to talk to her boyfriend and had stayed in his apartment before their meeting in the park. By this point, officers had spoken with many of the victims' friends, colleagues, and relatives. All of them pointed to Shirley. She was the only person with whom Andrew had had a conflict and complicated relationship. No one believed her words. The most valuable evidence came from a witness who had seen Shirley's car, a Toyota RAV4, and Andrew's car in the parking lot at 6:10 p.m. However, authorities didn't rush to charge her right away as they wanted to prepare properly. Over the next 2 weeks, they were able to build a solid case. Everything pointed to Shirley's guilt. Her lies were quickly debunked. Witnesses came forward, surveillance camera footage was found, and phone call geolocation data confirmed that she had been near her ex-boyfriend's home early in the morning and later met him at the park in the evening. Shortly before these events, the woman had purchased a .22 caliber pistol and had taken several lessons with a firearms safety instructor. The police spoke with the instructor, who mentioned that Shirley's pistol had a strange malfunction. It sometimes ejected live rounds along with the spent casings. At the crime scene, 5 spent casings and a whole 6th round were found. This could be connected to the issue the instructor had noticed with Shirley's gun, especially since Andrew had been shot with a .22 caliber weapon. The detectives decided to take her pistol for ballistic testing, but she was unable to find it. Shirley continued to insist that she had spent the entire day on November 5th in her bed in Iowa. However, she was caught in her lies when they showed her surveillance footage and phone records from the calls she made on her way to Andrew's. The woman had left a significant digital footprint, as she had been constantly calling her ex-boyfriend, trying to convince him to resume their relationship. When Shirley arrived at Andrew's place early in the morning, he let her in and even allowed her to wait for him to return from his shift. During that time, a pack of condoms went missing from his home. A pack with the same batch number was found at Shirley's house in Iowa, where she had returned after the crime. This further confirmed that the woman had been in his apartment. Despite all the suspicions surrounding her involvement in the murder, Shirley attended Andrew's funeral as if nothing had happened. Everyone noticed how unnaturally she cried, clearly pretending. She was practically wailing throughout the entire procession. Interestingly, Heather also attended the tragic event. She had tried to avoid meeting the unhinged Shirley, but Shirley still found a way to approach her. The stalker immediately began to claim that Andrew had loved her more. Their intimate life had been more vibrant, and now, after his death, their love would forever remain in the heavens. Heather was so frightened that she sought a restraining order against Shirley. Interestingly, after the funeral, Shirley quickly packed and headed to Canada. To assist the authorities, the deceased's family decided to hold another memorial service, deliberately inviting Shirley to lure her into the United States. However, she refused. Now, the U.S. police had to cooperate with Canadian authorities. Due to bureaucratic complexities, this kind of collaboration traditionally moved very slowly. All this time, the likely murderer continued to live her life freely. Finally, the Canadian police arrested her on December 12, 2001, but extradition was not yet on the table. It would require overcoming even more bureaucratic obstacles. It was expected that she would stay in jail until then, but the suspect was simply released on bail the next day. She was able to pay $75,000, after which she was required to surrender her passport and check in weekly at the police station. Interestingly, her psychiatrist helped facilitate this, even contributing part of the bail money. Additionally, 40-year-old Shirley was required to avoid contact with a list of 8 people who had restraining orders against her. This list included Heather and Andrew's parents. By this point, detectives decided to dig into Shirley's past. They were shocked by how troubled she was. It is known that the suspect was married twice. She had 2 children from her first marriage. She cheated on him with another man who became her second husband. They had 1 more child together, but they divorced. In 1993, Shirley was living with a roommate who was horrified by how she treated her children. She often beat them, not only with her hands, but with belts and any other objects she could find. The roommate couldn't take it anymore and moved out, immediately reporting the inappropriate behavior to the authorities. Witnesses came forward confirming that she could beat her children and even leave them alone at home for over a day. However, the second husband denied these accusations and maintained that she was a good mother. As a result, the case was simply closed in January 1994. During this time, the woman gave her children to their biological fathers and continued living her life as if nothing had happened. Later, detectives were able to find another boyfriend of Shirley, who described in detail how cruel she was. Once, she even knocked him off his feet, taking advantage of the situation and hitting him several times in the face with her high heels. Fortunately, he wasn't seriously injured. The guy decided to break up with her for good when he found Shirley unconscious, with clear signs of using prescription drugs in her own room. She was in her underwear, surrounded by roses and several letters, one of which was addressed to the psychiatrist. In the note, the woman wrote that she wasn't evil, just sick. In the end, it turned out that she hadn't even tried to kill herself. Instead, it was yet another attempt at manipulation. Andrew's death in this context seemed terrifying, but entirely inevitable. Impunity, sympathy, and lack of proper treatment allowed Shirley to systematically torment all the close people in her life. All of this ended in a bloody rampage. Soon after being released on bail, Shirley held a press conference and announced that she was 4 months pregnant. As soon as Andrew's parents, Kate and David, learned of this, they sold all their possessions, took their savings, and moved to Canada to fight for custody of the child. While it could only be confirmed after birth, they were convinced the boy was Andrew's. He was born on July 18th, 2002. His mother named him Zachary. A DNA test confirmed that his father was the deceased Andrew. When Kate and David arrived at the hospital, Shirley simply refused to let them into the room, not even allowing them to see their grandson. Given Shirley's treatment of her other children, Andrew's parents feared for their grandson and were horrified by how slowly the Canadian legal system was working. They couldn't achieve anything, but they feared that Zachary was in danger with his mother. Extradition to the U.S. was repeatedly delayed for various reasons. Sheeta Pegby fought for a long time with Shirley for the right to see her grandson. Eventually, she succeeded in securing just 1 hour a week for visitation. However, these meetings had to take place under supervision, as if they posed a threat to the child. They were even subjected to searches. Despite the difficulties, Zachary became a great comfort to the elderly couple, as they had lost their only child, whom they had longed for but could not have. Finally, in January 2002, progress began. Shirley was jailed until her extradition to the U.S. She voluntarily transferred full custody rights to Andrew's parents, but they had to comply with conditions. Shirley could call them daily, and they were required to visit the criminal in prison once a week. The grandparents were very responsible and never missed a single visit to avoid breaking the conditions. Despite the distance and bad weather, they strictly adhered to all of Shirley's demands, fearing that any slip-up could lead to her revoking their custody rights. In January 2003, she was released again. It turned out that she had directly approached the judge overseeing her case to ask for advice on how to avoid jail until her extradition to the U.S. so she could take care of her. Surprisingly, the judge accommodated her and sent detailed recommendations. Despite the absurdity of the situation, Shirley followed them and was set free. As a result of her release, Kate and David once again lost full custody, but they were allowed to spend much more time with their grandson, now without the supervision of his biological mother or a social worker. Despite the Beckby family's discontent, the judge still maintained that there were no grounds for concern about the child's safety. This was despite the fact that Shirley had likely killed Andrew and had been behaving inappropriately while in custody, even threatening another inmate with a fork once. Of course, Kate and David hated Shirley with all their hearts for the murder of their son, but they made every effort to maintain a relationship with Zachary. It was clear that Shirley was taking advantage of this. Gradually, the criminal began to exploit the situation. She constantly called Andrew's parents at all hours of the day and demanded financial help. The couple was forced to comply, buying groceries and items for a woman who refused to work and did nothing. Later, she continuously brought up Andrew's death, a topic that the parents tried to avoid at all costs. The birthday of the boy was celebrated by the Beckby couple and Shirley at McDonald's. The little boy ran up to his grandmother, Kate, and hugged her, which made Shirley angry. The woman screamed that she wouldn't allow them to love him more than his own mother. From that moment on, Shirley began making their lives difficult in every way. It seemed that she wasn't particularly interested in keeping custody of the child, but simply wanted to inconvenience Andrew's parents to make them suffer. A hearing for her extradition was scheduled for September 2003, which was supposed to be the final step before sending her to the U.S. During the wait for this process, Shirley started seeing a new boyfriend, but he learned about her suspicious past and broke up with her. As usual, Shirley began to stalk him, threatening him, claiming she was pregnant, constantly calling and creating scenes. But he didn't respond. On August 17th, Shirley called a friend and said she was going to take Zachary and visit the boyfriend at his home to set things straight. However, she got lost on the way and stopped somewhere on the street to ask for directions. That was the last time she and the child were seen alive. The next day, on August 18, 2003, they simply disappeared. No one could reach Shirley. That same day, a couple vacationing 20 minutes away from St. Quay, Johns discovered a woman's body on the beach. Next to her was the body of a small boy. They immediately contacted the police. The bodies were identified as those of Zachary and Shirley Turner. The forensic examination revealed that the woman had taken a large dose of medication prescribed by her psychiatrist to deal with her anxiety. The same substance was found in a bottle of baby formula. One witness reported hearing a suspicious cry from a child around 2:30 a.m. near the beach, but was unable to find its source. According to the forensic expert, the cause of death for both the woman and the child was not the prescription medication. After taking the medication and feeding her son formula, the woman tied him to her chest with a sweater and entered the ocean from the pier. The cause of death for both was drowning. Her car was found near the house of the man she was heading to that evening. Shirley left photos of herself with him, the child, and also wrote a letter claiming that he had convinced her to take her life and harm her son. However, during the investigation, it became clear that this was another attempt at manipulation. Shirley was just trying to cause trouble for the young man, who had no knowledge of her intentions. As expected, she wasn't pregnant, which was also part of her manipulation. Zachary's passing was a devastating blow for Kate and David. They cremated him, just like their son, and scattered his ashes in the same place where they had scattered his father's. Later, David admitted that he had been deeply concerned for his grandson's life. He was so shaken by the contradictory actions of the Canadian authorities that he fell into despair and sometimes thought that perhaps he could have done something about the situation. He just wanted justice to be served and to hold accountable the person who had caused them so much pain. David didn't want to tell Kate about this, but now he sincerely regretted not taking action at the time, because if he had, the boy would be alive and they could have cared for him. Eventually, he gave up on these thoughts, as he hoped the final hearings would lead to Shirley's extradition to the U.S. There, they could achieve justice and finally bring the boy into their care, as he was their only source of joy in life. When Kate and David learned of Zachary's death, they were so devastated that they even briefly considered taking their own lives together. However, they ultimately decided to channel their energy toward a greater cause and dedicate themselves to fighting for justice so that such a tragedy wouldn't happen again. The situation was further complicated by the fact that they were forbidden by Canada to participate in press conferences or discuss the incident under the threat of imprisonment. Despite their lawyers' advice to remain silent, Kate and David appeared on U.S. television to bring attention to their story. They shared their experience and sincerely believed that the Canadian law enforcement system was most responsible for what happened. Thankfully, the Beckbys did not face any punishment for speaking out, and they became active participants in the movement for justice. They launched a campaign against Shirley's psychiatrist, who had helped pay her bail, enabling her release. His actions were heavily criticized during the investigation, and he was fined $10,000. The Beckbys also condemned the judge who had allowed her release, which ultimately led to the tragic death of their grandson. In October 2006, a 500-page document was published by a child rights specialist who believed that Zachary's death could have been prevented. This document became a catalyst for change within the Canadian judicial system. In October 2009, the Zachary Bill was introduced in Canada's House of Commons. It proposed significant amendments to the country's criminal law. The law allowed judges to deny bail to defendants accused of serious crimes who used children as shields, which is exactly what happened in Shirley's case. If you enjoyed my work, please subscribe to the channel, support this video with a like, and let's discuss this story in the comments. Thank you all, and goodbye.